Get on Team Shaq with WinBet. We're playing parlays, boosting odds, and laying the wildest prop bets. Don't miss another game. Download the WinBet sports betting app today.
Sign up today and win $200 in free bets when you place a $10 first-time wager on a straight bet or parlay. Offer subject to change. Terms and conditions at winbet.com. Must be 21 or older and present in the state where playthrough WinBet is available. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-522-4700.
Blue Wire.
First pick in the 1991 NBA Draft, the Charlotte Hornets select Larry Johnson from University of
I'm not supposed to be here, man. A lot of people from where I'm from, don't make it.
Charlotte, we're back.
Welcome into another Buzz Beat, a Charlotte Hornets podcast. This is Richie, and I'll be joined by Brian and Lee today to wrap up our player grade podcast episode series. This is going to be part 3. On part 1, we covered Cody Martin, Gordon Hayward, Jalen McDaniels, Kelly Oubre, and LaMelo Ball. On the previous episode, we just had Mason Plumlee and Miles Bridges. And then today, you'll hear us talk about P.J. Washington and Terry Rozier, 2 interesting seasons from both of those players. And we get into some of the highs and lows for both of them and how they performed in relation to the expectations on the whole. If you guys are liking this series, please reach out to us on Twitter at BuzzBeatPod. Let us know your grades. Let us know if you disagree with any of our grades here on the podcast. We're going to go ahead and get started here with the conversation that we had on P.J. Washington and Terry Rozier. But before we do that, as always, subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, subscribe to us on Spotify, subscribe to us wherever you listen to your podcast. That way you get that episode immediately when it comes out. So let's go ahead and jump into this conversation. We're going to go to P.J. Washington, and maybe Brian disagrees with me, but I know you're a big fan of P.J., but I thought he went through some ups and downs this season, not to Oubre's extent, but there were some spells this season that I thought P.J. might have been a little bit absent at times, but I think when you look at overall, he had a pretty positive impact with this team. Also, when you look at the lineup data, the team was actually a tad better with him at the center position than the power forward position. But I actually thought that he started to find his groove at the end of the season, too, when he was put in that power forward position with Hayward out. Regardless of how you view this guy positionally, I think he made some slight improvements with his game. He's going to get most of his points kind of like as a low usage pick and pop, trailing big, or that occasional like dunker spot, like dump off dunk that he has occasionally. And obviously he's always had that ability to be a ball mover and a playmaker and keep the offense humming. He makes quick decisions. That's the thing that I like about him the most. Like, he doesn't hold the ball. We talked about Kelly Oubre on part 1, where when it goes to him, the offense slows down. PJ makes quick decisions. He swings the ball, he shoots, he puts the ball on the floor. He's not standing there slowing the game down. He did get better finishing around the rim, still not where he wants to be or where we think he should be, but an improvement nonetheless. He also had a fair share of dunks. We talked about this when we were the pre-draft stuff with PJ about like him not being this amazing athlete, but some of the dunks he had this year just kind of came out of nowhere. He just exploded off the ground, a couple poster dunks as well. He got better as a defender, I thought. He defended almost any position on the court. I think the Hornets put him in positions to where he was guarding, a point guard or players like Jimmy Butler. Like, his versatility on the defensive side of the court, to me, was the biggest strength on that end. The only position where he struggles to defend, I think, are those like bruiser bigs. And that's just obviously naturally not going to be a strength of his because of his size. But other than that, like, he has that versatility on the defensive side of the court. Overall, solid season from PJ. I will refrain from my grade. Offensively, it comes and goes, or it did last season. I just wish he would stay more consistent on that end of the court. Nothing blew me away this season other than like the defensive versatility. But I think overall, solid season for PJ Washington.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in. I agree with a lot of what Richie said. about PJ. The guy's fit in the modern game is perfect. This like hybrid big guy that can guard 1 through 5, that can be an offensive 4, can be an offensive 5, can post up, can roll. Obviously, he's most comfortable picking and popping or slipping the screen, looking for his jump shot. I think we saw his like catch and go game come on late in the season. In fact, and we've talked about this now a few times, but there was a podcast we did in like around the All-Star break, early mid-February, somewhere in there, where we were all sort of like maligning the fact that PJ seemed a little underutilized in the offense. Like, I thought the defense at that point had been pretty impressive, and obviously he was shooting the ball pretty well from 3, even if there were some hot and cold stretches. When he shoots it, I always feel like it's going, like if he catches it cleanly, I'm always like that thing's going in, even if he does, make it only 40%, feels like it's going in more. And then I really think like Hayward missing time and PJ getting more playing time, getting to play more at the 4, getting some different looks within that role, getting to play with Bridges a little bit more probably helps as well. Maybe even getting to play a little bit more with LaMelo at times probably doesn't, fewer minutes with Kelly Oubre might also be a help. But I just think like his game, he amped up the aggression, not like a crazy amount the last like 6 weeks of the year, but enough to make it feel like, okay, this is something. And starting, if you go back to just March 1st, so just an arbitrary date, but basically the last 20 games of the regular season, essentially, PJ over 4 drives per game. So nothing crazy, but you got to remember prior to this, again, this sort of arbitrary cutoff, PJ was averaging like right at or just under 2 drives per game. So started playing a little bit more, but also driving with more frequency as well. And he shot 69% on those drives going to the basket. Charlotte was 13-6 in those games too. Some of the other improvements for PJ this season on spot-up possessions, 1.03 points per possession, 54% effective shooting. That's up from 0.95 points per possession last year. Pick and pops, 1.3 points per possession, 72% effective shooting. Smaller, again, it's a sample. The sample size is smaller, but up from 41% effective shooting on pick and pops in 2020, 2021. So big jump there. Pick and rolls, 61.5% shooting, rolling to the basket, 1.2 points per possession. And at the rim in the half court, 60% shooting at the rim in the half court, according to Synergy, up from 49% last year. So I think PJ's finishing was actually meaningfully better this year. I still think he has issues finishing around taller players. I think too often he's too willing to like contort his body and give up and displace his own strength, as opposed to like functionally applying it the way Miles does. He's not as strong as Bridges, but like I think he could be a little more like, he's not skinny, like I think he could be a little bit more durable of a finisher. And I think he did a little bit better job, kind of like less spazzy, catching and finishing around the rim. Richie, you touched on some of those dunks he has, especially when he can like catch a runway, like catch and go, and get a defense into rotation. Then as the opposing 4 or 5 is trying to close out to him, PJ darts to the rim. I think some of the on-off numbers with him are they're just undeniably impressive. With PJ on the court this season, 45% of Charlotte's field goal attempts were threes. With PJ off the court, under 40% of their field goal attempts were of the 3-point variety. With PJ on the floor, Charlotte, 55% effective shooting. With PJ off the court, under 54% effective shooting. With PJ on the floor, true shooting, 58%. PJ off the court, 56%. Like, I could go on, but just basically like every offensive number, they shot more at the rim and they took more threes when PJ was on the court, and they shot better numbers from that range as well. So again, this guy just breathing air into the offense, I think, with his quick decisions, which Richie touched on, the above the break 3-point shooting that he has, and his ability to also catch and go and attack a closeout. And even in a smaller capacity, to be a guy that could finish. I thought he was really good making plays on the short roll this season. Kick out passes, hitting Bridges in dunker spot. All of that sort of stuff I thought was really, really good from Miles Bridges, from PJ Washington this season. And yeah, with him on the court, the Hornets offensively just under 118 points per 100 possessions, with PJ off the court 112.3 points per 100 possessions. Just like, again, he was so critical to them offensively. And then the defense is something that I've talked about a lot on here. I've tweeted about it a lot. His ability to like scale up and guard guys like Giannis and Bam, incredible. And he also has the ability to switch, get into a stance and slide and go against guard. I mean, he really does guard. I mean, he even guarded Embiid. Like, he guards every position. And I think he guards a lot of them pretty darn well. And that includes some of these sort of like freaky hybrid forward types, which are like the toughest guys to match up with one-on-one. Like, I can think about him, one of the games against Milwaukee this season, him getting so low. Like, he was guarding Giannis. Giannis is trying to post up, trying to get deep position. There's no like cross screen to get him lower. Like, it's just Giannis trying to isolate against PJ in the post. PJ gets so low. Like, it is classic, like, you know, basketball camp 101, like low man wins on defense. He forces Giannis to catch the ball, you know, closer to the 3-point line. Giannis tries to drive left. PJ beats him to the spot and gets a stop. And just like, that's hard. Like, you know how many teams in the playoffs would love to have a guy that could stand up Giannis like that? It's a lot. So I just think PJ's defense was really good. And again, this season, 3.3% block rate, 84th percentile for PJ. So yeah, I mean, he really is just like a 6'6", 6'7" center, but he does have that 7'2", 7'3" wingspan. And I think he does a pretty good job applying it defensively. So I kind of wish he'd get a little bit more of like the Miles Bridges like fight in him. I think that would even amp his game up even more. I think he does have kind of like a little bit more of a chill vibe out there, you know, which works for him very well. But I think if he could get a little bit more of like the Bridges like tenacity, it would amp up his finishing and maybe even take his defense up another little level too. But nice season from PJ. I rambled, but I love this guy. So Lee, any thoughts on PJ Washington?
I was getting ready to ask Lee if you could tell that Brian likes PJ or not. I couldn't tell.
Yeah, look, PJ's been BG's guy. I always enjoy listening to him do a little PJ monologue.
It's a hectic time of year. There's weddings, graduations, spring sports, and much more. We're busier than ever right now. And sometimes we forget to just take a second for ourselves. You know, a little you time. So this season, take a second to enjoy an ice-cold Coors Light, because you deserve a beer that's made to chill. At the end of a stressful week, I like to open the fridge and see those icy cold Blue Mountains popping off the Coors Light can. That's how you know the beer is cold. And you know what? I'm a sucker for it. It's crisp and refreshing. The beer is perfect for unwinding. Coors Light is cold lagered, cold filtered, and cold packaged. It's literally made to chill. So when I need a second for myself, I reach for a beer that's made to chill. That's Coors Light. Get Coors Light delivered straight to your door with Drizzly or Instacart by going to CoorsLight.com/BlueWire. Again, CoorsLight.com/BlueWire. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado.
Now on to Sleeper. Sleeper is the fastest growing fantasy platform today with millions of players. You probably already have a fantasy league on there. I use it for mine. It's a game-changing product unlike anything else in the industry. And now you can make money on Sleeper too by playing their new over-under game. It's super simple. First, in any sport, choose 2 or more players that you like and pick the over or under. For example, number of points in basketball or hits in baseball. Then choose the amount of money you want to enter into the contest. If you pick correctly, you can win anywhere from 2 times to over 20 times the money you put in. The main reason I'm excited about Over Under on Sleeper, it's the only app where I can join my buddy's contest and play together. It's got a built-in group chat where I can see and copy my friends' picks with the tap of a button. It's insanely fun to ride it out together. Stop what you're doing and download Sleeper now to play their new Over Under game and have fun with your friends, and most importantly, make some money. Make sure you use that promo code BlueWire and Sleeper will match your deposit up to $100. Again, download Sleeper, then use promo code BlueWire when you deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details.
So one kind of like general point I wanted to bring up, I brought this up before, and maybe at this point it's so obvious that it doesn't need to be brought up anymore, but there was often the the question whether PJ and Miles can kind of like exist on this roster together. And I think that is just like unequivocally done. Like that they obviously can from the eye test standpoint and from the lineup data standpoint. I think it was Richie that brought up the fact, I think that PJ had started to get more comfortable at the 4 later in the year. And the lineup data also bears that out. Also, any combination of Bridges Washington has been effective, whether it's PJ at the 4 and Miles at the 3, whether it's PJ at the 5 and Miles at the 4, like any one of these configurations have been successful lineups for Charlotte. And what that gives me optimism on is if somehow the Hornets can ever find like a top 20, top 15 starting level center, that you don't really have to worry about that as much, because now PJ has shown himself to be comfortable playing at the 4, which means you could have your traditional center. You could play PJ at the 4 and you could still have Miles Bridges on the floor too. Like that starts to look really versatile, athletic, switchy, offensive spacing. Like all of that starts to get really exciting for the Hornets if they can find that last piece somehow. So PJ was plus 4.4 on the year net rating. PJ at the 5 again this year, almost 2,000 possessions, plus 6 PJ at the 5 minutes. PJ and Miles on the floor together with any combination, plus 6.6. That's 2,500 possessions. Like these are big sample size, and they are just like obvious and glaring and have been now for at least 2 seasons. PJ Washington is like, you know, he's a high 30% 3-point shooter. He has been since his rookie season. I do think at some point he could have a year where he shoots like 40% from the 3 on the year. I think that's probably coming at some point. He was 47, 36, 71 on his traditional splits this season. You guys already mentioned the rim finishing. It improved, but it's still got to get better. I would like to see him get to the free throw line more. His free throw rate is still fairly low. And the other thing is, I think more fans that don't necessarily dive into some of the lineup data stuff and don't necessarily see like the advanced numbers get frustrated with PJ at times. And I can kind of understand it, because if you're not looking at the lineup data stuff, there is times where it feels like he kind of disappears, particularly offensively. And I think that's because he is not really able to create for himself yet at this point. I think it's up for debate whether that's something he should or can add as he develops. But like, I do get it. I understand that if you just kind of like watch this team for fun on a night-to-night basis, you could get frustrated by saying like, where the hell has PJ Washington been tonight? You know, like that does happen from time to time. And I think he's gotta either add something off the dribble, or it's got to be kind of like Brian said, he's just got to have a little bit more of that like Bridges energy of like inserting himself into the game, even when it's not necessarily working from him from like an offensive standpoint. So I do think it's fair to say he's got to add something that allows him to not just hang out when offensively when the jumper isn't falling. And then defensively, like I could go on another monologue here. I won't. It particularly like late in games this year, he just had some monster defensive plays. Like Brian brought up the Giannis stuff. If you go back early in the season, he defended Sabonis incredibly in a late game situation where Sabonis tried to make a game winner and could not over him. He's become an incredibly important defensive player for this team. And it almost feels like last season, late in the season, we thought there's a Miles Bridges kind of big offensive jump coming because of what he was able to do. It kind of felt like PJ defensively late in this season just really came into his own. And you could be optimistic that maybe he could start to become like a really incredible hybrid defender for the Hornets. So I guess I'll start the grading off. I went B for PJ Washington. Like, I think he's still developing. I think he's still really improving. I think there are still obvious holes, but like this is a huge offseason for him. If he can make even if it's not like a Miles Bridges, like crazy jump, even if it's just another really solid improvement offseason for PJ, I think that's really key.
I'll go my grade for PJ. I will go with a B+. The only real thing I have against him here, which you guys talked about, was sort of like the aggression level at times offensively. There are those games where if he misses his first couple of threes and he's not the one that's in the pick and rolls that night, like it's Plumlee or Bridges, you're kind of where is he? Under 15% usage this year, you know what I mean? So it's going to be interesting to see, can he scale, if called upon, can he scale that up, maintain these efficiency gains that he had this year? That's kind of I think one of the ways we're getting at this a little bit. You saw Charlotte try some of those inverted pick and rolls that they do a lot with Bridges. They'll do it occasionally this season and the year prior with PJ. Maybe that's an avenue into it. I'm a little skeptical of that, but you never know. So maybe that's one route into it. Maybe doing PJ in the post a little bit more is another route, but that's something they've tried and hasn't been super fruitful before. But yeah, I'll go B+ for PJ Washington, and hopeful and excited to see him continue to grow as a player.
I'm also going to go B+ for all the reasons that we've mentioned. We're going to end with Terry Rozier. He finished with 19 points, 4.5 assists, 4.3 rebounds. This is an interesting one for me. I definitely have thoughts, but I'm going to let Lee take this one first. Lee, what's been your evaluation of Rozier this season?
Rozier's an interesting one. I agree. Rozier comes to Charlotte in 2019-20 and takes off. Has had career years every single year in Charlotte. His efficiency was down just a tick this season. But still 37, almost 38% from three on 8 attempts a game. So he's still one of the premier kind of catch and shoot off-ball shot hunters in the NBA. His clutch numbers did dip a little bit this season, as did the entire teams. The Charlotte Hornets were kind of if you listen to this podcast, you know very well that they were top 3 in the league in clutch numbers each of the last 2 seasons. That number did not continue. They dipped fairly significantly this year in the clutch. So Terry, to me, he was what he was. He also, he's a small guard, so he's very limited defensively. He's like a dogged defender. He's a determined defender, but he's just a limited defender because of his physical profile. But the Hornets kind of made the decision, and this was something we talked about a lot on the pod as well, is when you had Devontae Graham, Malik Monk, and Terry Rozier all at the same time, it was how are they going to negotiate this from a roster construction standpoint going forward? Because it didn't feel like all 3 of those small guards could exist together moving forward. Obviously, Rozier is the only one that remains. So, when you have size on the wing and length on the wing like the Hornets do, and when you have, a 6'7" point guard, I think it's okay that Terry Rozier is an undersized shooting guard if they can mask some of that other stuff with all the other athleticism and length they have. But he is still a limited and liability sometimes defensively. The other interesting point with Terry is he was kind of I don't know if forced is the right word, but he was thrust into really more of a backup point guard role this year than he ever has been previously.
I thought he did better than what most people probably anticipated.
He did. I think that is one place he actually progressed this year as a playmaker and a caretaker of offense. According to Cleaning the Glass, he had 1,300 possessions at point guard without LaMelo on the floor this year, and that was actually a positive net rating of 3. So that number was up and down a little bit this year, but it steadied out as a positive lineup. And he had a plus 1.5 overall net rating for Terry Rozier on the floor. So, I think he progressed there a little bit. It's still not necessarily something you want to rely on, is Terry Rozier as your primary playmaker. But to be able to go to it in times where LaMelo is off the floor, I think is important. So I was pretty pleased with Rozier this season. Again, he just has a ceiling because of his size and his profile. But and I think obviously the contract is what it is. We'll kind of see how that plays out. but he's still younger than people think. Terry Rozier is 28 years old. So like, he is not an aging player at this point. So we'll see how the contract plays out, but I think he's still a good fit next to LaMelo and a good fit for this roster. It's funny, like we go through all these guys, and maybe besides Oubre, nobody was really like had like horrible marks, and then you still have the result you have. But I think it's a testament to the fact that this is a young core that's growing, improving each year, even if the finishing result is still obviously not where we'd like it to be. We'd like to be watching Charlotte Hornets playoff games right now.
All right, a couple things that I want to add with Rozier. Lee said a lot of the things that I were going to mention, but the mid-range shot this year, I think we thought maybe last year that was an aberration, but he actually was better this year from that area of the court, especially kind of in that floater range. I think that's a great counter to have with his gravity as a scorer from behind the arc. He's got to have something inside the arc as well, and he's got that with that floater range, mid-range pull-up. I will say I thought that he was far streakier from behind the arc this season than probably any year in his career here in Charlotte. We saw some big fourth quarters from him, maybe the Hornets' best player in that quarter when you just wanted a spark from behind the arc. But we also saw him struggle mightily in the first half and to get things going. And his gravity was much needed, but it just felt like this season that for whatever reason, it was like he was a slow starter more so than previous seasons. And I don't know what you point that to or what you can attribute that to. And maybe that's just my eye test and I'm seeing things wrong, but it felt like he couldn't get things going early. And sometimes with the Hornets' slow starts, it put them in a hole. And he tried to win some games in the fourth quarter, but at times it would just be too late for the team. So he did end up shooting, high 30s from behind the arc, but it didn't feel like it was as consistent it was more streaky than I thought. As a defender, we've talked about how he's a subpar defender. I was talking to Brian pre-recording how he's got a weird trait where he has the ability to shoot the gaps on defense in the passing lanes, even get steals in the backcourt. So it's not like he's a zero on that end of the court. He's still subpar, but that's a weird trait that he has that I would like to note. And then lastly, I thought he had a pretty good synergy with Mason Plumlee on those backdoor cuts, which I mentioned when we were talking about Plumlee to start with. So interesting season for Rozier. I struggled giving him a grade, but I'm going to give him, I waver between a B and a B minus. Maybe I'll listen to your grades first, Brian and Lee, and maybe I'll change it. But it's somewhere in that range. It's hard for me to give him a grade because he did perform well as the whole, but I just thought he was inconsistent this year. Maybe I'm just looking too much into it.
Yeah, I mean, Richie, first off, the mid-range shooting, you touched on that. I was a little skeptical that would stabilize. We'll see where it goes last year, but once again, in the mid to high 40s overall, 46% shooting on long twos for Rozier, according to Cleaning the Glass. Overall effective shooting dropped a little bit from 55% down to 54%, but I think some of that probably has to do with maybe the above the break 3-point shooting dropping just a little bit. This guy is one of the premier corner 3-point shooters in the NBA. 41% shooting from the corners with 19% of his field goal attempts coming from the corners. He really is. I think at this point, people know it now. We've certainly talked about it on this pod for years now. He really is one of the premier movement shooters in the NBA. And I think it was really kind of cool that he was brought in post Kemba to be the point guard of the franchise. And luckily Devontae Graham stepped up early in the 2019-2020 season. And Charlotte did not have to go down the path of trying to really actually explore Terry Rozier, primary creator, full time. And he slid into this role as a combo guard, a movement shooter. And Terry's just a good offensive player. He can really score the basketball. Coming off screens this year, over 1.2 points per possession on a lot of volume, almost 62% effective shooting. That was in the 90th percentile in the NBA. And again, if you were to square that with volume, it probably jumps up a couple of percentiles because he's very, very good. Estimated plus minus on offense, according to Dunks and Threes, 2.4 per 2+2.4. That was in the 93rd percentile in the entire NBA. You guys touched on his ability to sort of steward some of those lineups without LaMelo. I think those were buoyed by the presence of Miles Bridges, like in the lineups without LaMelo and Miles, but Terry Rozier on the court. No knock on Terry. Those are probably Charlotte's two best players that aren't playing. But those lineups with Rozier and without LaMelo and without Bridges were not nearly as good. About 106 points per 100 possessions with a negative net rating. I've already made I've stated plenty of times how I think about Rozier's defense. I think it's a problem. I don't think he's good at the point of attack. I think when he's out there, Charlotte's defense is going to always be a little bit compromised, despite the fact that he competes, despite the fact that he can poach and get these steals that Richie was just describing. I think he struggles off the basketball, and again, having him often as like the primary point of attack guy just really limited Charlotte in terms of what they can do pick and roll. This is a team that needs to put two guys on the ball. They need to switch, try to keep the ball in front. They can't play conventional drop defense. Part of that is guys like Plumlee and PJ at center. Some of it, though, is also has to do with the point of attack defense, where I don't think Rozier offers a ton of resistance. I think frequently when I go through the film, he's the guy that is causing team-wide defensive breakdowns. Like, everyone on this roster is guilty of that, to be clear. Like, no perfect defenders on this team. But I do feel like outside of maybe Oubre on a per possession basis, Rozier is sort of like has kind of some of the more glaring missed rotations, missed assignments, that type of stuff. But he's a terrific offensive player. And I just think Charlotte needs a little bit too much from him. It'd be nice if he could play off a couple more, like as good as LaMelo and Bridges are. It's like if he could play off guys that created a little bit more gravity, or one guy that really got downhill and got to the rim a little bit more, you could really even like lean into just how good his offense is. Like, it's totally scalable. You know what I mean? Like, you could scale his usage down to 20% from 23%, and he'd be incredibly productive and probably a little bit more efficient. Like, imagine him in like the Joe Harris role with Brooklyn. I know Harris is hurt right now, but like if Rozier could play off guys like Durant and Kyrie, like just how awesome of like a third or a fourth guy he could be in an offense. So it's still altogether, like, I think a pretty good season for Rozier. He shot the hell out of the basketball, and that's what they pay him a lot of money to do. I don't think this extension will look great long term, as it's just set to kick in with 5 more years, which will take him into his 30s. But for the time being, he's an important player for Charlotte and pretty productive on offense. So I'll give Terry Rozier a B for this season.
Lee, did you give your grade?
I gave him a B as well.
Okay, so we're all going to give him straight Bs. We did not get to IT or Montrez or Ish, but they all played their specific roles this season. And then maybe we can spend some time over the offseason to discuss some of the younger guys with JT Thor and Book Knight and Kai Jones, but they just didn't get enough minutes for this exercise. As we wrap, be sure to subscribe to our podcast. Be sure to give us a rating and review on Spotify or Apple. For Lee and for Brian, I'm Richie. Have a good one, and we will talk to you guys next time.
If you're hiring, you need Indeed, because Indeed is the hiring partner where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire to claim your $75 credit before April 30th.